I'm Rick Kaler. Thanks for joining me. Inflation is a common economic term and a relatively simple concept to grasp. One straightforward definition at thebalance.com by financial journalist Kimberly Amado is that inflation is the increase in the prices of goods and services over time. Yet applying the concept of inflation to our income and our expenses in a practical way seems to be really difficult. Amado goes on to say, as prices rise, your money buys less. That's how it reduces your standard of living over time. So let's take a look at this. Inflation is currently running at about 2.2% a year. So this means the $3.49 cup of coffee that I enjoyed this morning will cost $3.57 next year. A new house that cost $250,000 to build last year will cost $255,500 this year. So this seems simple enough until we start applying it to the salary that we earn. If you earned $50,000 last year and inflation is 2.2%, then you're going to need to earn $51,100 this year just to maintain the same standard of living. So if your employer gives you a raise of $1,100, do you really have more money? Yeah, you got more dollars. But in terms of purchasing power, you haven't received a raise at all. Yet your brain probably equates an increase in dollars with an increase in purchasing power, which is absolutely not the case. If in the same situation you received a $500 raise, would you actually see an increase in purchasing power? Well, no. You would see a decrease of $600 in your purchasing power. Your salary would increase to $50,500, but it would take $51,100 to buy the same goods and services. So this is probably clear so far. Let's take it to another step. What happens in a year like 2015 when there was almost no inflation? If you didn't receive a pay raise in 2015, it was no different than receiving an $1,100 raise in 2019 because your purchasing power remained the same in both years. Yet imagine yourself in 2015 learning that you're not going to get a salary increase. How do you feel about not receiving a raise? Would your feelings be lighter if you knew that there was no inflation that year? Now fast forward to 2019 and you receive a raise of $1,100. How do you feel? Chances are you feel happier and more valued in 2019 than you did in 2015, even though the impact on your purchasing power was nada. It was the same. Over time, prices generally go up at least slightly, but occasionally they actually decrease. We call that deflation. In 1949, the Consumer Price Index actually decreased by 2.1%. This meant in 1949, you would only need $48,950 to buy the same goods and services that $50,000 purchased the year before, 1948. Even if your salary stayed the same, you would have received an increase in purchasing power of $1,050. Now imagine that in 1949, your employer reduced your salary from $50,000 to $48,950. How would you feel? Angry? Hurt? Devalued? Why? Your purchasing power and standard of living would be the same as the previous year. No change. If we understand the concept of inflation, why is our emotional reaction to salary increases and decreases so seemingly illogical? Well, it isn't illogical at all when we recognize the response comes from our emotional brain, the limbic system, not our thinking brain, the cerebral cortex. The emotional brain sees the dollar amount and responds almost instantly. If we get more dollars, it releases happy chemicals. If we get fewer, it releases unhappy chemicals. It's as primitive as that. It takes a relatively long time for the cerebral cortex to kick in, that thinking brain, and try, often unsuccessfully, to talk the emotional brain down with the facts. Now, given those facts, I don't think our understanding of inflation and purchasing power is going to change anytime soon. Thanks for listening.